miles of the Ohio River. Congressman Massie attended MIT, where he earned a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in mechanical engineering. During school, he invented a technology that enables people to interact with computers using their sense of touch and leverage the technology to found Sensible Technologies, Inc. Congressman Massie, he's probably looking at me and saying, I can't believe you just took this straight from my website. So Sensible Inc., Sensible Technologies Inc. created 70 jobs, obtained 29 patents, and the hardware and software he developed is now used to design automobiles, jewelry, shoes, dental prosthetics, and even reconstructive implants for wounded warriors. In Congress, Thomas serves on two committees: the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Committee on Oversight and Reform. Thomas lives in a timber frame home he built on his cattle farm in Kentucky with his wife and high school sweetheart, Rhonda, and their 4 children. He's a constitutional conservative, a staunch supporter of individual liberties and free market capitalism. He's a warrior for our Second Amendment rights. He's a Kentuckian through and through and continues to do a great job of informing himself to make the best choices for our Commonwealth as well as the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Congressman Thomas.
I'm going to tell you how much I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm actually missing an opportunity to vote no tonight on the bill. They're cooking up something in the back room right now in Washington, D.C. Some kind of, well, it's supposed to be a bailout package, but it's a Christmas tree, and they're adding all kinds of ornaments to it right now. And Pelosi came out with this bill last night at 11 o'clock p.m., and then they said they would work on it today. So they're still working on it in the back room. But I said, you know what? The hell with this. I got in a car and I drove here today from DC. So I'm excited to be with you. Is everybody ready to crush this race on May 19th? Yeah. There's like 2 parts of this job that I don't really like, and I'll be honest about it. The first one is being away from my family 4 days a week. That's a little bit tough, but the other part is raising money. And I'm going to self-quarantine next week because Congress is in recess, and I'm just going to dial for dollars and beg for money. But you are the folks I don't have to beg. I mean, you come in and give it to me. You're like, we want you to go up there and take your ass whipping. So here's some money. Chris McCain is here tonight, and most of you know him. He's my district director. He used to be the jailer in Lewis County. I know he's more popular than me. He always tells me, I'm glad you take an ass whipping in D.C. so the staff in Kentucky doesn't have to take an ass whipping here. Because most congressmen, they campaign on one thing, like Tyson was talking about. They campaign on one thing, and then they go do something else, and then their constituents are really upset with them. They can't understand why they're voting that way or why they did that if they campaigned on one thing. But, you know, life is easy for me here in Kentucky because it's hard for me in D.C. when I go up to D.C. This was a particularly hard week. I don't know if any of you all saw yesterday. I was driving to work from my aunt's house. And I sleep in her basement, by the way. And I was driving to work from my aunt's house, and I just got really ticked off. And I told my staff, I said, I'm going to go to the floor and give a speech if I can get some time. And I gave a 5-minute speech yesterday about the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, which happened yesterday. These days all blend together. But, you know, and So I'll tell you a little bit about what I said in the speech, but not the whole speech. It's really frustrating the way the swamp works. They started out with the FISA / Patriot Act reauthorization. There's a bill to do that. And if you watch Schoolhouse Rock, right, all the bills are supposed to start in committee. I'm not going to sing for you, but the bills start in committee, and that's where they're supposed to start. And then they mark them up, and then they debate them and amend them. And the people on the committee are supposed to be like the subject matter experts. And the committee for the Patriot Act and the FISA bill is the Intel Committee and the Judiciary Committee. And they brought this reauthorization of the Patriot Act in front of the Judiciary Committee a couple weeks ago. But people started offering amendments, and they didn't know how to shut that process down in the committee. They can shut it down on the floor, but they can't shut it down on the committee because the rules are different. And people started trying to make it more constitutional. And at one point, Jerry Nadler just stopped the committee. He said, we're not going to hear this bill anymore. I'm canceling this hearing, and they shut it down. And then what did they do with the bill? They took it into the back room. They took it, and there's literally a back room. Behind every hearing, behind every committee hearing that you see, there's a back room. There are actually 2 back rooms. I didn't know this when I first got there. I accidentally walked into the Democrat back room my first day in Congress. I hung up my coat, everybody's looking at me, I got my coffee, I walk out to take my seat on the committee, and I realized I'm on the Democratic side of the committee, and I realized that that's why they were looking at me weird back in the back room, because I was in the Democrat back room. But anyways, I haven't made that mistake since then. But they took this bill into the back room, and they wrote it back there. And they marked it up back there instead of doing it in the committee. And the reason they do it in the back room is the lobbyists and the members of the deep state, which, by the way, are parts of the executive branch that were there under Obama, they're there under Trump, and they'll be there whoever the next president is, whether it's a conservative or a liberal. They basically survive in the swamp. They marked up this bill in the back room and then brought it out, the FISA reauthorization. And anyways, they brought it to the floor yesterday. They introduced it at 11 p.m. the night before. This was day before yesterday. And then they wanted to vote on it the very next day. And there's a 72-hour rule that says we're supposed to get 72 hours to read every bill. Well, the reason they don't like to give us 72 hours to read every bill is not because congressmen would actually read a bill if they had 72 hours. You could give them 100 days and a lot of my colleagues would never read the bill. They don't want you all to read the bill. And that's why they introduce it at 11 p.m. They know you've already gone to bed. And then when you wake up, the newspapers didn't have time to report on it. And they're going to pass it the next day. So anyways, that's what they did yesterday. So I went to the floor of the House of Representatives and I called them out on it. I just lit into them 5 minutes. I don't like to quote Democrats, but this Democrat had a good quote. Harry Truman. Give them hell, Harry. Yeah. Whenever somebody tells me to give them hell, I say what Harry Truman says. I say, I give them the truth, and they think it's hell. So,
amen.
And it's infectious. Savannah Maddox and Will Schroeder in the state legislature. Are there any other state legislators here? Anyways, they give them hell, and I really appreciate it. And it only takes one person to give them hell. Like it takes one person to object to a motion. We don't go under Robert's Rules of Order in the House. If there are 434 members of the House who are just perfectly happy to take a voice vote, and one person stands up and says, Madam Speaker, I demand a recorded vote, they have to do a recorded vote. I did that 40 times in a row one year, right before Christmas. They were trying to sneak a bunch of stuff through. And they started booing me toward the end. And I just turn around and wave at them. You can see it on C-SPAN. I'm like, you do know back home, like people are laughing at you because you don't want to do your job, because you don't want to vote. I was trying to explain it to them. But anyways, on this vote yesterday on the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, You know, there are provisions of the FISA Act, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that were used to spy on President Trump. I mean, that's how they spied on Carter Page. That's how they spied on the people that were close to Trump. They used the FISA court to do it. So we thought that they should reform it in this bill. And it would have happened if they'd been marked up in committee. But they decided to do it in the back room, and they brought it to the floor, and of course they had enough votes to pass it. By the way, there's an email to one of my staffers yesterday. I put a snippet of it on Twitter. It said, to one of my staffers, it said, if your boss plans to vote no on this bill, you need to call or email the whip team immediately. This is imperative. And they put imperative on all caps. How amazing is that? Not only do they try to get the Congress people, the men and women that represent you, to do what they want, they basically threaten the staff that if you don't rat out your boss, if you know your boss is thinking about voting against this, you better tell us now. And a lot of staffers go for that. But anyways, they had the votes, they knew it, and so they passed it. But there's this little parliamentary quirk. You know, people say read the bills. I don't just read the bills, I read the rules. And I studied the rules, and I figured out that within 2 seconds of every bill passing, you can offer an amendment to rename the bill. And so some of you may have seen I did this last year when they passed the debt limit increase. Immediately I offered an amendment to rename the bill, a bill to kick the can down the road and for other purposes. Anyways, that's infectious. If one person will do that, if one person will show the other members how the rules work, then the other members will do this. And so yesterday we had a big victory. Ken Buck from Colorado came up to me. He said, you remember when you offered that amendment to rename that bill, a bill to kick the can down the road? He says, I want to offer an amendment to rename this FISA bill. And I said, what do you want to name it? He said, for Federal Initiative to Spy on Americans. Yeah. So he did. He offered the amendment. They begged him not to, just like they begged me. I told him what was coming up. By the way, I don't carry money in my pocket. This is a 2020 bill. Anyways, I didn't want you to think I was like showing off and I didn't need more money. I need a lot of money. 2020 is not going to pay for my campaign. Anyways, Ken Buck offered that amendment, and basically what he did is he shamed all of Congress to show what was actually going on. Mike Pence said, he told us in a conference once, he said, when you're in the majority, you legislate, and when you're in the minority, you communicate. So that's what we're trying to do. So anyways, we're making a stand. We don't always win, but we're gaining numbers, and when you show other people that you can do this stuff, and then you can still get reelected, and that's why you all are so important. If I can win, not just win this reelection, if we can crush this opponent, this shows other congressmen, this is a proxy war. This is a proxy war for liberty and for freedom and for being able to vote independently, for being able to vote not with a caucus, not with a party, but with the 750,000 people that you represent. To show them that you can vote this way against all the threats that they make to you and come back home and get reelected, not by the skin of your teeth, not by a thin margin, but by a huge victory, then that'll send a message to the other people that I serve with that, you know what, Massie, I can follow Massie because here's a prototype for how you can vote what you believe and get reelected. So that's what's important. This race is important for that reason. My friends in Congress are watching this race, this primary, because they're all worried about a primary. You know, there are 435 congressional districts. There are only 80 of them that are contested in the general election. Most of them are contested in primaries. And the Republicans are watching this race in DC and saying, can I go up there and can I vote what I know is right? Like on this, I'm going to give you an example, the anti-lynching bill. Okay, unless you've been in a cave, you've heard about this because the media's come after me because I voted against a bill that would outlaw lynching. Okay, people say, was that a hard vote to take? oh, it's easy to vote. It's an easy vote to take. You put your card in the machine and you press the button. What's hard is to come back home and defend it when you've got all the fake news working against you. But I want to explain that vote to you tonight because it's important. It's like it's an instructive moment to show a lot of different things. So number one, that bill was just posturing. That was like the East Coast and the West Coast trying to act like everywhere in the middle still lynches people, right? And it's like people don't go to jail or something for that. So number one, there's already a law against this, okay? Nobody lynches anybody today and gets away with it. So the first question when they offer a bill that's redundant is why are they doing this? Why are they offering something that's redundant? So that was the first problem with the bill. The second problem with the bill is I believe every victim deserves equal justice under the law. I have a real problem with hate crimes. I've never met somebody who murdered somebody who liked the person they murdered, right? At the moment they murdered them. With the exception of like negligent homicide, which is also a crime, but that's not murder, you know. And so that's the problem that I have. When you elevate certain victims, then you make other victims less important. And I think that's a problem. But the biggest problem with that bill is it ignores the fact that we live in a republic, that we have state governments and we have federal governments. And they deal with different issues. And Will Schroeder can tell you this. Look in your copy of the Constitution. You know what? Murder is not a federal crime. The Founding Fathers never intended for that to be tried in federal courts. That is a state crime. Abuse, theft, even rape. Those are all state crimes. Those are meant to be tried in state courts. And so when the federal government, I tell my colleagues who cooked this bill up, I'm like, you ran for the wrong office. If you wanted to legislate this, you should be a state legislator. Because there is nowhere in the Constitution that gives us the authority to legislate on this issue. We don't have a federal police force to arrest people for these crimes. Our federal courts are not equipped to try these crimes. These belong in the state. And so to vote for that bill, as easy as it would have been politically, I mean, there was a lot of pressure, obviously. I think there were ultimately only 4 people who voted against that bill. And there were, I can't even count on my hands how many people came up to me on that vote and said, you're taking the right vote, but I can't afford to do this. I'll lose my next election. Like there are some smart people in Congress, and there's some constitutionalists that understand the Constitution. They understand that bill had no place on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. It should have been, that bill belongs in the states. Anyways, so that's an example of sort of the votes you take. I had some phone calls from some supporters, and they're like, yeah, I know you're right, but my neighbors are calling me up and saying, why are you supporting this guy? Like, could you just not vote that way one time? You know, the problem is the calculus of that, if you keep doing that, then eventually you lose your compass heading, okay? It's called true north. And I'll admit to you, I go north by northwest occasionally, okay? But I always know where true north is. So for instance, kind of hate to say this, but I voted for the $8 billion funding bill for the corona response from the federal government. I believe there's a place for the federal government in disease research, for instance. You can't do it on a state-by-state basis. It would be very hard. There's a spot for the federal government at the borders to try and keep it from coming into the country. By the way, I have 3 tests for every bill that I vote on. You all probably know this, that this will help you explain to your neighbors when they're coming up to you and saying, Massie supports lynching? Oh my gosh! You can just explain to it. No, he's got 3 tests for every bill. Number 1, is it constitutional? Okay? They used to ask Ron Paul, for instance, do you read those 2,000-page bills? you say, I don't really need to. I get about 4 pages in and I find something unconstitutional and I don't have to read past that, right? And that's the truth. But anyways, number one, is it unconstitutional? Number two, is it better handled at the county level? For instance, Gary Moore is the judge executive. I was the judge executive in Lewis County. Some of these problems are best handled at the county level. Some of them are best handled at the city level. And Tyson can tell you that. Some of these belong to the state level. Will Schroeder can tell you that. Or is it something that really should be handled at the federal level? And then the third question I always ask, so the first is it constitutional? Number two, what level of government should be dealing with this? And number three, can we afford it? I mean, there's a lot of good bills that go across my desk. Pass the first two tests, but we can't afford them. I mean, if you just vote for every good sounding bill that does something good, we'll be bankrupt by the end of the year. I'm surprised we're not bankrupt right now. I mean, technically, if a bank looked at our balance sheet, they would say we're bankrupt, but people tell me we're not, at least not now. Anyways, so those are my tests. I did squish out a little bit and vote for the coronavirus response because there was some of that spending I believe is necessary and constitutional and we can't afford it. There's some of it that I don't agree with, but ultimately I thought it was too important so that I should vote for it. By the way, so some of the precautions that I'm taking for the coronavirus, and thank you all for showing up and not being scared of this and not being in a panic like everybody else is. We can use common sense. The governor of Kentucky suggested that churches shouldn't meet. I think that's out. First of all, it's out of his jurisdiction. The other thing is just use common sense and, do like we did today, the chicken broth. I've got some other protocols that I practice. So when I go to a restaurant, I tell Rhonda now I have to order alcohol, not tap water. And then after every bite of food, I take a drink of alcohol to make sure, just in case there were some germs in the food. So that's been working for me pretty well. Just some protocols, just common sense protocols like that you can follow. So other things that I wanted to talk to you about, and by the way, I'm talking to you about things that I think hopefully you can appreciate. If you brought another congressman up here, they wouldn't talk about these things. If you brought another Republican up here, they wouldn't necessarily talk about these things. I tell people, by the way, coming in here, I was talking to Jim Jordan, and some of you got to talk to him. I put him on speakerphone, and we were talking to him. Jim Jordan always bugged me to join the Freedom Caucus, and some of you may think I'm in it. I'm actually not in it, but those are my best buddies, and they were like, "We need you to join the Freedom Caucus. We need 40 conservatives that come down here to the floor and do the right thing." And I told Jim Jordan, "Actually, you just need 39, because I'll be on the floor doing the right thing. You all come and join me. I don't need the free dinners. I don't need to go to the meetings. Let's just get this done." But really what it's about is the voting card, hopefully I still got it here and I have